I wanted to start out with just a couple grounding slides, not to taint you in the direction of where we want to go with our review here, but just a reminder of the things that as an organization we think are important to acknowledge, and also what guides our work. So we know that it's important to acknowledge the lands that we're on that have been and continue to be stewarded by Indigenous peoples here in the Twin Cities metro area where our office is. That's the Dakota and the Anishinaabe people. We also acknowledge this, I think, because of the traditional ecological knowledge that they hold, and that we see that as an important part of what climate literacy is. Once again, not to taint us in any particular direction here. And also knowing that the way that we educate, so the ways that we educate, the ways we engage with different people is also part of what we see as how an effective and comprehensive climate change education is. And so starting with that piece. And then secondly, our organization is guided by a mission of igniting and sustaining the ability of educators and of youth and of communities to act on systems perpetuating the climate crisis. This document that we'll be digging into emphasizes systems. I don't know if at this point in time the intention was those systems to be beyond the Earth systems, and so something just to prod our thinking a little bit. And there's three pillars that really guide our work: overcoming disinformation, centering anti-racism and systemic equity, and personalizing and localizing climate change action. And so we really use those to guide the work that we do, and sort of be our wayfinders to some extent in where we go. Today we have a nice, awesome, small group here, but just a reminder that there's some guiding principles of interaction that we know to be important while we're learning together in this space. All of your voices matter. You're all going to bring different and diverse ideas, and being respectful of those opinions and ideas. We're all learning and we all have something to contribute. You might be challenged by maybe some new ideas, some new ways of doing things. Listening to understand, listening from zero is something I always like to think about. Paying attention to who is talking, but also who is not. And Lindsay and I will try and do a good job of facilitating that too. Especially today, what you put into this is what you're going to get out of it. The outcome of this is that each of you individually will ideally be providing some feedback, some review of the climate literacy principles, speaking from your own experience, having fun and being creative. And there's one other principle that Lindsay and I just kind of discussed. We intentionally are holding this workshop pop-up discussion today outside of the formal process of review, not because we don't love Frank Leopold, who guides those. He's one of our closest partners, but we wanted there to be a space where people felt more than welcome to say whatever they wanted to about the climate literacy principles, and feel safe in doing so. Once again, not that we think that there's any repercussions. I will say that I do know that there is a really profound opportunity to influence these principles. They are very serious about making them different, and even to the point of maybe not calling them climate literacy principles. So I want everyone, I don't know if that's a guiding principle. We should be adding that whole start from full on brainstorm mode here as far as what you think is important. There's, all things you can suggest anything you want. There's no guidelines or barriers as far as that goes. So yeah, that's our goal, to follow those and think about these climate literacy principles. So what are we going to do together? We're going to start with a curious question just about them to get you thinking. We're going to do a quick overview of what these are, and then kind of guide you through some questions that are either exactly the same as or connected to the questions that are actually asked in the portal, and then provide some time for discussion. And also we scheduled this for an hour and a half with the idea that you would schedule an hour and a half on your calendar, and we'll leave time at the end for you to actually go in and like submit. We are not able to submit a review as a group, so each of you individually will need to submit your own form. You can't submit consensus documents to the government, apparently. We would love for you all to consider doing that and taking time to do that. And we have the deets on how that works. Lindsay, did I forget anything?
No, I'm super excited. I'm super excited that we have a small group. It's going to make this experience better. We'll get to hear from everyone, like voice, instead of having to do a lot of breakouts and like other stuff. So I'm really jazzed.
Yeah. Awesome. So I'm going to stop sharing and hope that everyone's in the document. But the first one we're starting with is, let's just spend a couple of minutes working on this question. Are you familiar with the principles? And if so, how have you used it or seen it used? It's super interesting to see that most people haven't really used them a lot or are aware of them. And I think knowing that the intention, I think, of these is for folks to use them. So putting that sort of in your head as we're working through this, of like what would make you use these principles. One of the questions that they ask is how would you use them, or how should they be used, I believe. So if you haven't used them, let's figure out how you might. And I'm glad that you're here today to bring that intention. Is there anyone that has a question about any of the things that were written, or a comment?
I can share. So climate generation, like a part of our work is coaching educators how to do climate change education in their context. And over the past few years, we've gotten a lot of requests for that. And we realized there wasn't a lot of awareness around what student learning outcomes could be as it applies to climate change education. And there are a ton of different frameworks that sort of outline this, but they're all like very subjective or like based on what their initial agenda was. And so what we decided to do is we created this synthesis document that I just popped in the chat for you, that pulled from, 13 different resources and created a list of student learning outcomes and some of the major compartments of what we believe are the best practices of climate change education. Feel free to use this if you find it helpful. And it needs to be updated because there's some new stuff coming out, of course, all the time. But the climate literacy principles is a part of this. And it really, if you go through and you were to look, all of them are in this climate change science and in some human influence on Earth. But we know that climate change education isn't just that. There's all these other things too. And so when I'm like thinking about it, the climate literacy principles as it's written now is really great for building out that like science awareness, but not great on other things like understanding solutions or climate justice or the personal and cultural connection of climate change. You know, this was made a few years ago now, and I'm actually looking at it and be like, oh, I would probably amend it. But these were our ideas in the fall of 2021.
I was going to say too, and we used it with teachers. One of our teachers, that was a social studies teacher, really took exception with this. And his statement was that so many of his students are climate literate because they're living climate change right now. And so just as we think about how we're going to change it in the future, think about that too.
That's a good, hold on to that. That's going to answer one of our questions. Hold on to that. Well, thank you. Well, I'm going to give a quick overview here just on the document itself as it stands. So just like a historical grounding. So the principles came out actually in 2009, the first version of them, which is coincidentally pretty much when I started at Climate Generation. It's super funny. So I feel like I've sort of followed the trajectory of them. And Lindsay and I actually had a little exception with this. They call it a framework. I might argue with it being an actual framework, but it's a framework and essential principles for formal and informal education about climate change was the intention. It is something that could be used as a discussion starter or launching points for inquiry. And it can also serve educators who teach climate science as part of their science curricula. So you can see like the heavy science part there. And it being, you know, a resource for communities, for educators, for all sorts of folks. And so I think it's to think about this document narrowing its scope or broadening its scope as you are developing your comments on it. The document itself, as it's laid out in its little booklet form, there's a link to it in the slide here if you want to download it, if you haven't downloaded a copy yet, but it gives its definition and goals, a little background info, like tiny amount, but background info on like science, and how climate literacy develops. Statement on what scientific credibility and peer review are, as well as climate decision making. So it sort of like slightly bridges into a little bit of that more like skills and like social science area. And then it has provides the climate literacy principles. There's sub principles within it, and there's a glossary in the back. This guiding principle for informed climate decisions and subcomponents also is an important part, because I think the document itself, there was some idea that the purpose of it, that if you had the knowledge that was in this document, you would therefore be able to make an informed decision. And so I think that's actually an interesting thing to think about too in the review of this. If you are going to make informed decisions, is this actually the information that you might need? The definition as it stands right now of climate literacy is that it's climate science literacy. I know for a fact that that is really very close to being officially not in there. So but you should point out if you think that that's not important. Climate science literacy is an understanding of your influence on climate and climate's influence on you and society. So a very simple sort of back and forth. And when discussing what a climate literate person is, it's someone that understands these essential principles of the Earth's climate system, which they detail. They know how to assess what scientifically credible information about climate is. They communicate about climate and climate change in a meaningful way. Interpret that however you like. And they're able to make this informed and responsible decisions with regard to actions that may affect the climate. So this is like what it means to be climate literate. I will say that one of the other discussions that Lindsay and I had in making this is there's this sort of like cyclical problem with the document in terms of like, we're supposed to kind of inform, like, what do we think the purpose should be while not knowing really what the purpose is. And so like helping, like, so it's like, we have to think about, and you can, I think, think yourself, like, what could this document be and what could it inform? That's like kind of an exciting opportunity, I think, here as well. Once again, going back to that, do you think it should narrow its scope or broaden its scope? You can also literally go into the form if there's like what the thing you feel most strongly about. I just want to make this clear. I'm not asking everyone to write like a thesis in this thing, but if the thing you see most throughout here is that you think that a climate literate person is someone who is climate literate because of their lived experience, and that's the thing you really want, and most importantly, to get in this review, then put that in and submit your review. But I encourage everyone to at least be able to identify some things they feel really like important. So we've got a couple of questions that are helping us narrow, think about more like start broad and narrow in on climate literate people. And so the first question is, what do y'all think everyone needs to know to tackle the climate crisis? And if you want to spend some time on that question, I will be quiet for a bit too. Yeah. So everyone's starting to move into the next slide. So I'm going to pause for a moment because the next one is actually about what does everyone need to be able to do to tackle the climate crisis, which I know some of that, like obviously skills and knowledge overlap, but as I want to give an opportunity for anyone for you all to kind of look over these, and if there's any ones that you have like a question around understanding. Our intention with doing this as a group was not necessarily for you to feel like you need to take others' ideas with you into your review, but maybe to see someone articulating something that you were trying to figure out in a way that is better than you think you could do it, or also be challenged to think differently maybe about some of your ideas. So I'd love if there's any questions that folks have or on anything they're seeing, feel free to ask. Some really rich.
I'd like to know who wrote the one about the people aren't born terrible, and like how you had like so Luke, do you teach that? Yeah, like that's awesome.
I do, and there's some so I get to teach it in my evolution units, and there's some curriculum that some people in Germany have kind of put together that looks at that, and there are lots of studies that get into experiments that try and probe like how much is that a human thing compared to chimps, compared to different cultures within humanity, and like the one of the defining things of humanities is our willingness and our enormous ability to cooperate. Like, it's our first impulse, unless there are systems that kind of push us in other directions.
I think it really connects. I was just reading that too, Brittany, as you were coming off mute, but that really connects this idea that I have about people need to be super aware of like the power of individual choices and what that can impact, but then understanding that it's not always about your individual choice, that it's also about the systemic change that is required, and about the connection between those things. You know, as an individual, you can only have so much power as your community supports or as the people around you support and give you opportunities to engage with. And I think that understanding that, and also what Luke was saying, like how these invisible forces in our lives kind of like put us in these pathways, and how to work outside of those predetermined pathways is really important. And it's particularly for like building efficacy and empowerment. Yeah.
Anyone else have a question before we move on to the skills? Well, feel free to double write things or leave things in that you wrote before too. But the next slide is asking, what does everyone need to be able to do to tackle the climate crisis? And there are 2 slides for this one too, if we're running out of space, because you are all way overachievers in a good way.
Okay. We're doing a great job filling up these slides. So many amazing ideas. I hope you have time to go back and read other people's thoughts while you're writing your own. One thing I'm thinking about as we move into the next slide, but people are putting a lot of amazing things, right? Like self-care, unionize, which I love the question mark, but what is it? Finding community, being innovative, collaborating with partners, communicate and listen. These are all things that may or may not traditionally be thought about as like built in the education system, right? This is like social emotional learning, or maybe it's an artifact of a teacher's great job building community and culture in their classroom, right? Like these things aren't necessarily like the cornerstone of the education system in all ways. And I'm wondering if maybe we just have time to go around real quick and be like, how does education do these things that we're saying? Like, what's one thing that you see education's place as being like powerful in helping people act and know and do like action towards fixing the climate crisis? One thing I can share, I can start this, I guess, is I think about, gosh, I think I have a really idealistic way of thinking about how education can be done because I come from like an environmental educator background and I didn't like have to work in the incredibly challenging system that is public education. But I think educators can do a really great job of creating a common community amongst people with so many different backgrounds and like different lived experiences. Like it is a diverse community as long as you can bring that out and help your students listen and care for one another and understand like and value that diversity across personal experience. Yeah, and which I think that can do a lot for preparing students to be in a world that is ready to tackle the climate crisis. I see Brittany nodding. I'm going to pass it to Brittany and see if you have things to share.
Yeah, that definitely got my brain spinning. We think a lot about culturally responsive teaching and how that can help students both build community, but then also find their voice and how important that is for them to realize that like their background isn't something to ignore. And now we're going to teach you all new things, but like come into what we're going to teach you with your background and make everything stronger, make your learning stronger and your whole community better and really, really use that voice to make a difference. And so we've been trying to do that in the youth work that we do, but I think all teachers should.
I think working too with project-based learning and some of the Montessori kind of things where students have choice, and it brings into what Brittany was talking about too, and using what skills you have or developing new skills and just that collaboration and problem solving.
When I think of community building, I do think teachers do a great job in general doing it, right? But it's a kind of like a convergence of lots and lots and lots of soft skills, right? That it's hard to like articulate and like objectify each particular skill. So when you're, as teachers, we like to be as objective as possible with our students. And so how do you, as you're building this community, this really abstract thing that you're building, how do you articulate objective things within that, right? Because we know kids, especially our little ones, developmentally, they're just not there with the abstract, right? Even in the high school level where I teach, many of my kids struggle with the abstract quite a bit. And so they can feel the community, but how can they attach language to it? How can they attach action to it? How can they attach like, oh, hey, I learned this, as opposed to just talking in a really general sense of like, yeah, we have a community, like, what does it mean to be a community, I suppose? And then sorry, now I'm rambling, but.
I'm muted, but it strikes me, Ryan, something you said early on was, I think it was you, talking about how you work with your social science. Was that you? The social, yeah. So that was something that came to my mind of like, how do we do this too? Is like provide models of that, bringing those languages to get like showing how actually you are oftentimes talking about systems, or, I mean, you know, you're talking about same things, but there may be slightly different language and also concepts and how they relate. So that, to me, to answer your awesome question, Lindsay, is one.
Yeah, that's, I think that's an important point, because that is something that my co-teacher and I have run across quite a bit. And also, like, I'm a science teacher, and so when I'm teaching chemistry, for instance, there's language I use it in my classroom around the just the basic algebra or the geometry that we're working on within the context of my chemistry, that the math teachers use different language, but we're doing the exact same thing. So to your point, it's like that communication piece with other folks to try to, like, so you're not two, what is the saying, two ships passing in the dark or whatever, you know what I mean? Like, so it's a good point.
Catherine, thanks for raising your hand. Sorry, we were talking over you, maybe.
Oh, no, you're good. Yeah, so the aspect of our project in West Virginia that I think would be relevant here is we had this public service announcement competition for the past 3 years around Earth Day. And so students would make video and audio clips around climate change, and we had grants to pay to broadcast them around the state. And it was really exciting. I didn't really know what to expect, you know, when we first started this, but some of the news agencies like invited the students to come on and talk about what it was like to do this. And so they're being, also our grant paid for them to get like awards, like monetary rewards. And so they were getting like these really positive feedback and accolades for engaging in climate change. And I mean, in West Virginia, that's a strength of the community, is like that celebration of students and youth. And so I would have thought we would get some pushback, but we really didn't. It was really cool to see. So I think that kind of became a community in a way of like the climate change communication community of like people who just say it's happening and we care. So I just wanted to share that.
Any other? Awesome, very. What a fun group. I'm not usually excited to work at the end of the day, but I'm having fun today. So thanks, everyone. It's later for some of you, I know too. Great. Well, that's a really great segue, I think, to the next slide, which is, what does it mean to you to be climate literate? And I think, like, once again, there's no rules here. So this is what's going to be helpful to you. I mean, for me, when I think about this, I might, in my mind, be like, okay, to be a climate literate community member might be this, which might be different than a climate literate student, or I don't know. So I might do precursor, or I might just say, no, everyone needs to know this. So it's up to you how you do this, and you can do multiple. And you can also say climate literate is a dumb name, and I think it should actually be whatever. So all those things, no rules. Some really interesting, these are great ideas. I'm thinking just about, since this document was created, yeah, so NGSS were developed after this, right, John? You know, or yeah, you're like, yeah. I'm just thinking about, we have a more, I don't know, we've gotten a lot more guidance in the realm, and the opportunity for this document to be something more than, there wasn't climate science like principles necessarily laid out, you know, before that. And actually, I know that for a fact this document was used to some extent with NGSS. I think it got brought in a little bit to influence some of the stuff, if I remember. John might know more. But any commentary, thoughts, or questions about these answers? It went in a lot of different reactions or directions. I think there's been some question, which I know is especially science educators would completely push back on, of like how much to be climate literate is to be able to take action, how much climate science do you need to know to do that, if that's what being climate literate is? And I mean, I also like, I'm a science background and I think it's important, but so there's this delicate balance of that here too, right? Which I'm going to segue actually into the last activity we're going to do, which is looking at, if everyone wants to go to slide 20 as the example. So there are the climate literacy principles as they're laid out in the document. And there's a full page for each one that has, it's essentially a reference document, information that supports those principles. And there's a question around what should be the ranking of importance that they're asked in the document, but also which ones are important and not. So I just did an example slide, not that this is how I would do it, but I did an example slide to show what you could do in your own slide. Everyone gets their own name on a slide you could go through. Is in the left column to put in order, like rank where you think they should fall. If you want to cross one off, the format, if you go up to format, text, and then text, it has strike through. You can highlight the text to strike through if you don't know how to do that already. And if there's some that you think should be added, there's 2 spaces there, but if you want to add other ones too. And so if you want to go through the slides below, you can find your name at the top left corner. And that's more just so people didn't move all over to find things, but not that we're going to attribute this to you in any particular way.
Kristen, can I ask a clarifying question about this?
Yes, please.
So we're ranking in order of importance, not of how, like, chronology that they should be taught, correct?
They have, the question is, how should topics be weighted and ordered within the document? So that actually sort of is both things, right?
And I would have 2 different answers for
Right.
each of those. So
I
And
mean,
so
maybe that's a comment on this question is like,
exactly, they're all open-ended answers. So you can say, I would weigh them in this order based on progression of learning, or I would weigh them in this order based on importance. This is how, and you should think about it this way is more important, or I don't know. Does that make sense? Okay, cool. All right. See people kind of finishing things up. I love teachers. I love what teachers do and make their systems and like get things cleaned up in their own. This is like a premier teacher gallery here of interaction. Nice job. Well, I want to be sensitive to it being 5:15 for me, 6:15 for some of you. I don't think is it 4:15 for you, Betsy? You're 5:15 now?
No, 3:15. We don't change ever.
who knows what Arizona's doing?
Yeah,
Arizona's the only one that's not changing, but we also don't know what they're doing.
yeah. So we're Pacific time now.
I want to hop over to the last slide to be able to talk through this and see if there's lingering questions or ideas. And as you're thinking about this, I think I'll share my screen, although my Google is acting weird. These 7 questions are the questions that are asked for when you log in. And they're all open-ended boxes. I believe you can save your work once you get a login. But it took me, you can see down there, it took me 2 minutes to register an account, confirm through email. They send an email and then you have to change your password and then you navigate back to the main page and you're in. So it's super quick. You can also upload a video or audio file if you like. If you want to do it that way. I think that's accessibility. Our intention with this group was, like I said, for you all to have time to like think about these, but also hear from other folks, and also have a document that you could reference. And so this is like a cooperative document, so like looking at other ideas is fine, and using other folks' ideas. There's no initials, there's no credit given throughout this to anyone. Oh shoot, I don't have the date. When is this again? May 31st, right? I think it's May 31st is the closing deadline to do this.
So,
We will be sending these slides out also to you. At this point though, I'd love to like just hear some like thoughts on what you're most excited to share. Actually, I'm interested in hearing that. Like, what are you really excited to put forward into your reflections for the United States Global Research Program? And not, if you don't want to share with us, that's fine too, but I'd love to hear if anyone else is willing to what you're excited to bring forward.
I would be excited to bring forward the idea of expanding it beyond just the scientific part of it, and make it more civic minded and broader and more encompassing. Is there any work, do you know, that's going along with this, like with the ACE framework and everything that's being done globally too with climate change education?
Well, I do know that in this document, it says that a social sciences document is being developed as well, and that's not true anymore. So that this document is it. So there's that. You know, that they all know each other. And I'll say there's a couple other things happening right now also, like Lindsay is working with North American Association for Environmental Education with a committee that's developing climate justice education principles. What's the other thing, Lindsay, too? There's another one that came out. I forget what it was, but there's like
you mean the report, the K-12?
no, there's another working group developing like a framework or something.
There is.
Anyway, so we're trying to see, there's like a through line between the groups.
It's a very interesting time. Like, it feels like there's multiple groups that have just come out with frameworks, and then there's a couple more coming out. And it's strange because oftentimes there's like one or two people that sit on all of those. Which maybe, like Frank, knowing ACE so well, and him being a part of this, maybe that means that there is connection, but I don't know if there's any formal connection between these things happening. Yeah.
That was my real concern. What is the niche of this document in relationship to other things? So there are some more documents that are more focused on K-12 education. This sounded like the original intent was to make it beyond that and have it more to be impact on general public. And it'll be interesting to see who provides the feedback, which direction such a document goes.
Yeah. I mean, when I think about, efforts from like the group that like Climate Matters, they're ones that worked with meteorologists, right? So like there's been movement for like more professionals, what they should know too. I mean, there's also like just the straight up opportunity to like, this is an interagency document to like educate the agencies, like flip it back, like the government themselves too. So I think that's a really great, I mean, I think there's a need for almost like another level after this of like focus grouping around what niche is this going to serve? What opportunity is there? Because yeah, it could go way K-12 because it's a lot of K-12 community that's like jumping in on it. And I don't know if that's useful or not, but. Any other things that people are excited to bring forward or questions that they have lingering right now?
I'm actually really interested to see. So some of the things that they have in this climate literacy principles, like the validity of including those is underpinned by research, like, and I'm really curious to see how they deal with that. If the general public or practitioners are saying that's not important in my experience, but there's research to show that it is important, I am very curious to see how they balance that and make decisions for that. Like the one I'm saying, the one that's like the scientific consensus. It's a very specific benchmark in this, and it's validated by research that shows people are more likely to support action on climate change if they understand the scientific consensus. But I haven't heard anyone say that in this meeting, and we did another one too, and in most of my like circles, people don't talk about it.
I guess I didn't mention it today, but I do think it is important. I have heard, the Yale climate opinion maps, when we talk about with students on how to communicate, we always reference those, and they kind of just use those stats as like, well, 50% of West Virginians think this, but then they don't say, well, what percentage of scientists think this, and so I definitely think that's important. Even though I didn't mention it earlier, I would not want that to be excluded.
It might make sense just to comment on that real quick, to go back and like read into the details of some of these if you look, because like right now I think Kristen gave us 8 things to evaluate and rank, but each one of those represents a broader suite of ideas. And so maybe you can say like, yeah, humans can take actions is important, but I wouldn't include maybe these things, or maybe add more, or you might be a little bit more nuanced there if you take a look back at that.
Well, Lindsay and I can sit on here for 5 minutes till the end of, if anyone wants to like try registering and doing it. I'm going to send you all for sure at least one reminder, if not what to say, hey, you did this, you came to an hour and a half, get that review in. And if you want to share with your networks, the link, that's awesome, just to get more people providing good perspectives. But it's what a lovely group of folks to spend some time with, thinking and being critical, constructively critical. Lindsay, do you have any parting words of?
I appreciate y'all being here. I mean, I'm just reading through your ideas. I really sparked a lot of curiosity and inspiration in what I'm going to suggest too. And I just appreciate y'all giving your time to this and to our group. It's great.
Thank you for organizing this. It's very informative.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Thanks, Jen.
Thanks.
Well, we'll stick on, but feel free to take off and enjoy the rest of your Monday.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Bye, y'all.
Thanks.